Morning.
Okay. Good morning.
It's good to be with you again. We've got a little bit of a lower crowd this morning, looks like, but I know it's fall break, or has been, and about to be for some other counties, so I know a lot of people are traveling. But it's good to see everybody here today that's here, and pray for those who are out venturing. The last time I was with you was on the 3rd Sunday of September, and we stopped at, we went over the Church of Thyatira. We went through the verse-by-verse study. That's where we ended. So today we're going to pick right back up with our continuation of chapter 3, and we're going to be looking at Sardis. Now, we've already done the cultural study of Sardis, so again, we're going verse by verse. And so a lot of things you'll remember, and a lot of things are going to be a little bit newer to you, okay? So Sardis, what do we remember from our class study? I just put some bullet points up there like I did the last few Sundays when we've been going through these churches. The city was founded between two large mountains. That was kind of that was a little bit of a rare scenario. Most of the time there was one large mountain. And what would the cities most likely use that mountain for?
Where they put their temple.
Yeah, they would put basically the most holy, most protected buildings up there. What else was it used for? What happens when a siege was laid by an invading army?
Oh, yeah.
That's where you went.
That's a fortress, yeah.
That's where your fortress stood. And here in Sardis, they had two mountains, but instead of using both as a high city, an acropolis, that's what that means, high city, they used one for that purpose, where they built this large fortress, which ruins we really don't have much left today because of the mass earthquakes that occurred in this region during this time. You got to understand something too, that when you look at the geographical map of an earthquake, like if you look at seismology maps that show you all the fault lines, these cities are sitting right on them. It is wild to me that, and I mean, it's not like they really knew, it's not like they understood that they were sitting on a fault line. And Laodicea was one. They sat on one side of the fault line. Sardis was sitting right on one. And so when the earthquake of 60 AD hit, that was mid-1st century, a little after mid, it was so massive. It was so massive. Actually, I put up there at the bottom that the earthquake that hit at night in 60 AD was so massive that seismologists believe that it was a 10.0 or greater on the Richter scale. That's just amazing. And of course, we don't know, but based on the damage done, that's what they've assumed, is that it was just beyond massive of an earthquake. It was so large of an earthquake that it crumbled their acropolis. It actually broke 2/3 of the mountain apart. And then I put up there 300 acres of the residential district was covered by 1/3 of that mountain. The mountain basically fell forward when the earthquake struck, and then the backside of the mountain went basically kind of landslided down. And so there goes the fortress too. Now that was one mountain. And earthquakes are mentioned in Revelation, aren't they? We'll get to those chapters, Revelation 6, when we get there. Maybe there's some context there that John is touching on. Don't know. But one mountain was used for that. What did they use the other mountain for? Which was kind of odd. Instead of using both as fortress-occupied mountains, which to me would have been pretty smart, having two acropolises. Acropoli, I guess it's plural. But what did they use the other mountain for? I put it up there. It's a cemetery. It was their necropolis. City of the dead.
Yag.
Do what?
Yag.
Yeah. They used this mountain to bury their dead. And this was kind of odd. Most places didn't do this. We talked about in that culture, they really glorified death, elevated death. And so by burying their people in the mountain, it was a way of elevating them into the afterlife. It's just kind of interesting, the culture and the religious context that we're looking at here. But they did believe that. And so it's interesting that in the letter of Sardis, which we'll look at, Jesus plays on this context a lot, talking about being alive, being dead, back and forth. This city, their patron goddess was Kibbalah, mentioned above right there. She was the goddess of the hunt. She was often depicted with 2 lions. Often she was riding them. She was, her priests were actually known as priestesses. They were actually men who had been castrated, who claimed to be female. So there's that. It was in the worship of Kibbalah where in March, at the end of March, I believe it was on the 24th, the people would gather in the town square and they would parade, get drunk, and they would parade up to the temple grounds. And when they got there, the high priestess, again, was a male with makeup and all the female jewelry, being the priestess, would come out and they would induct the ceremony where people, those drunk enough, dedicated enough, would castrate themselves. And as you can imagine, this was a very disgusting, bloody, messy process. And if you were fortunate enough to get their blood on your white garments that you wore at the town square, that's what you wore to parade in, then you would also receive that blessing from Kibbalah. But somebody had to sacrifice. That's for sure. So I guess we can get right. Gold, purple dye, and grain were 3 exports out of Sardis that made the city very wealthy. In the river there, you could actually find gold dust, flakes of gold. Even today, I believe is what I was reading. Even today, you can a lot of what do you call them people?
Painting, yeah.
Yeah, you got a lot of people that'll go out there and get permits to do that. We'll start there at chapter 3. We're going to start at verse 1. And these letters always start with "to the angel of the church in," and it says the city name, so that's why I just started with the text after that. He who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars says this: I know your deeds, that you have a name, that you are alive, and yet you are dead. So, do you automatically see the context? Do you already see the life and death context here? 7 spirits mentioned again. We saw that in chapter 1. What are the 7 spirits? Who is the 7 spirits?
That's God. Yeah.
And in what essence of God? What character of God?
It's the totality. 7 is completion.
The totality of what? The completion of what? The answer is God.
Yeah.
Yes, the Holy Spirit. Okay. The character of the Spirit, okay? Yeah. We actually looked in chapter 1 where that's identified. And so here it is, mentioned again. So if we go back to Isaiah chapter 11, we see that context. Because John does 2 things in this letter over and over again. And he plays off of the Old Testament text, the Tanakh, the Jewish scriptures. Let's just say that, the Jewish scriptures. And then he plays off what other? The culture. Right?
Okay.
And in verse 1, he's played on both. Already, right off the bat,
yeah.
He's already done both. So he says the 7 spirits of God, the 7, again, chapter 11, verse 2, you see the 7 mentions of the Spirit of God, the Spirit of the Lord, of wisdom, of understanding, of counsel, of strength, and of fear of the Lord. Sorry, got lost. 7 stars, we looked at that in the last few studies. To the Romans, who held the 7 stars?
Probably Zeus.
One of those gods.
Yeah, I'm just guessing.
The emperor.
Ah,
Because
yeah.
to the Roman, the 7 stars represented what? The 7 heavenly bodies. Because remember what we talked about. The Romans believed that the sky was this big bubble of water, basically. I think Rita said a big bowl of water. That's how they looked at it, because the stars were always moving. But these 7 planetary bodies seem to kind of be in the same spot, or kind of be in the same motion over and over again. Now, obviously the Earth sits on an axis. So this is going to become a problem for the Romans later on, because these planetary bodies are going to change over time. And there is, that's kind of what introduces the worship of Mithras. And we're not going to get into that today, but that was another religion that kind of sneaks into Roman culture, because it was basically this belief in the zodiac and all that, and they believed that it was always constant, the universe was always constant, and then when they realized that it wasn't constant, that threw everything into chaos, and so they said, well, something had to happen, and they introduced this other god, Mithras. And this Mithras was this god who swooped in and kind of shook things up. It's a mess. Messy, messy, messy. And of course, false religion will be super messy. Mythology is why it's called that. It was a mess. So the Roman emperor was known to hold the 7 stars. He knew the way. And that was the thing. The Romans used the stars and the planetary bodies for navigation, especially on the seas. Yes, sir. Navigation on the seas, big time. We looked at some coins. I believe there were some minted in the time of Domitian that had his son on the back of the coin. And you remember his son is holding out his hands, and you see the 7 stars. Yeah. And then the other one was during Hadrian's time, Emperor Hadrian. Both great persecutors of the church and of the Jewish faith as well. But whoever held the 7 stars held the way, knew the way. And you remember, Hellenism is key here. So the emperor was up there with the gods. That all started with Julius Caesar, and it never really ended down the line. And we'll talk more about the history of that, how that kind of came about, as we journey into our other chapters.
Ethan, my Bible says the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and then refers back to chapter 1, verse 20 of Revelation.
Yeah, I mean, you could see that, but the 7 stars was a Roman reference. The Christians in Sardis understood exactly what John was saying. They had coins that had the 7 stars and the crescent moon on the coins. So Jesus is using their context to put spiritual application to what they're doing. Is that more understandable? Throughout this letter, John is going, and plus that's commentary. You're going to get mixed commentations on that. I can already tell you. You should see some of the things that some of the rabbit holes I've been down. Some of them go real deep, and some of them not so much. But yes, so the 7 stars, you could look at that and say it represents the 7 angels of the churches in Sardis. We have to understand too that angel there simply means messenger. So I believe this is talking about a overseer of each of the churches, because the way they would have read the word is much like they would have done in a Jewish synagogue. Do you remember we talked about that, where basically you would have someone who would get up and and they would get up and they'd read the text to everybody. That's kind of how Revelation was meant to be read. You can tell that by the way the letters are written. So yeah, I mean, you could connect it to that. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying it at all. But there is cultural context to that very phrase right there. And plus, he's connecting it to the 7 spirits of God, which is the totality of the Holy Spirit of God, which is just amazing. When you really look at what John does here, it's beautiful authorship. I mean, just awesome. And we're going to get deeper and deeper into this, and it's just wild. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so you have a name that you're alive, but you're dead. Okay, so there's that context again. He's playing off their fascination with death, the way that they would elevate their dead in their mountain in the necropolis across from the temple of Kiblah. We'll talk about that in a moment. Verses 2 and 3. Be constantly alert and strengthen the things which remain, which were about to die. For I have not found your deeds completed in the sight of my God. So remember what you've received and keep it, and repent. Then if you are not alert, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what hour I will come to you. So much context here, so much. In our cultural study, we talked about the failures of the city of Sardis. When the Lydian king Croesus, known as the richest man of the world during his time, he held this city at one time, okay? And 400 years from this event, the city falls again. But in both instances, it falls due to the carelessness and ignorance of the army that held it, of the king particularly who held it. Bad decisions equal bad results, right? We'll talk about the Seleucids part of it right there in just a moment. The first fall, do you remember the context of that? It was the Persian army, Cyrus the Great, comes in. And he's invading he's just knocking these cities out one by one. He's conquering left and right. Persian army sweeping in. So they get to the Lydian kingdom. And at the Lydian kingdom, they come across the city of Sardis. And that's where King Croesus is reigning. So King Croesus, because he don't stand a chance against Cyrus the Great and his army, he flees to the top of the Acropolis to his massive fortress that once stood there. Okay, this was not after the earthquake period. This was way back. Okay, talking Persian days. Okay, Romans aren't even they're goat herders right now or something. They're not a thing right now. So, and you remember that story that what happened was the Persians were watching, and the Lydian army was basically up all hours of the night watching the invading army, making sure they didn't try anything funny. And one of them history is they either bobbed their head out of sleeplessness, he got sleepy and he kind of leaned over the wall, or he just was looking over, but either way his helmet fell off, one of the guards. So the Persians watched because they thought, they probably thought it was kind of funny. And all of a sudden the guy disappears from the wall, and then before they know it, he reappears to grab his helmet midway down the mountain. And so the spies watch, or the sentries watch, as this guy goes back into the secret entrance. And they had tunnels that they had dug up into the Acropolis that went up into the fortress. And so King Cyrus is told of this by the commander of that sentry that saw it. King Cyrus believes it. And so King Cyrus decides, let's move our army to the other side of the mountain, cause a distraction, and send our special forces in. And so the army goes to the other side, they create a ruckus, all the guards flee to the other side of the wall, not knowing what's about to happen. Carelessness, wasn't paying attention, and all of a sudden the Persian secret forces, special forces, the Navy SEALs of their day, so to speak, sneak in through that tunnel entrance, make their way into the Acropolis at night, while most of the people up there, probably the king himself, was asleep. And they take the Acropolis within a few hours. And the city fell. Now that was one instance. Now that would have been enough. But the history repeats itself, as it often does. And so the next time, this is when the city was under the control of the Seleucid Empire. You remember the Seleucids? Remember the Antiochus guys that we talked about in our Daniel study? The Seleucid Empire branched off of which empire? Which one of the big four ones? Which one of the big four we talked about in Daniel? Was it Greece, Persia, Rome, or Babylon? Where did the Seleucid Empire branch from? This was the empire that divided into four. Greece, yes. Yep, the leopard with the four heads, right? Okay. So one of these branches sprouts the Seleucid kingdom down the road. And that's where you get introduced to the Antiochus guys. And they were good kings, but it got to Antiochus IV, and that guy was a little bit of a Looney Tune. But Antiochus III was in power at the time. And he had such a massive control, such a massive kingdom at that time, that Archaeus, his cousin, says, hey, cuz, I'll take the city of Sardis for you. I'll watch it. I'll rule over it. You go do your thing. Keep your conquering going. I'll protect things here for you. I'll keep the throne warm, right? So Antiochus III says, okay. I mean, why not? You're my cousin. You're family. Sure, I trust you. Well, then on down the road, it comes time to come back and take the throne. And Seleucia comes back, and Archaeus has barricaded himself up in the Acropolis because he wants to be king forever. There was that. And so Seleucia did almost the very same thing that Persia did. Except the way the city fell this time was they noticed, because during the siege you had wounded soldiers and people that had gotten hurt during the battles that, probably fled up into the Acropolis, into the fortress with the other people. Those people were starting to perish. And so what they would do is, because they didn't want to deal with the stink, they would take the bodies and they would toss them over a certain section of the wall. And they couldn't go across to the other mountain and bury them. So their solution was just simply throwing them. So that's kind of, anyway. So they noticed that these vultures are gathering on one certain part of the wall. Well, common sense would say that vultures, who wouldn't let anybody get close to them, what do you think anybody's guarding that section of the wall if the vultures are up there roosting? No, there's no guards over there. Who would want to guard that area? It probably stunk horribly. And so the Seleucians ended up saying, that part of the wall is unguarded. So at night, interesting, the special forces of Antiochus III scale the wall and take the Acropolis within a few hours again. So twice the city fell because the people were not alert. They were not sober. They were not watching. They were not vigilant. And Jesus is talking about their spiritual state as a church, and he's saying that's where you are right now. That's where you are. And so again, he's playing off of the culture of that very city that everyone would have known. And I put there at the very bottom, both of these events happened at night. And so did that massive earthquake in 60 AD. At night. All these events would have most surely felt like a thief breaking in and stealing. Because if a thief's going to break in and steal, at night's when he's going to do it, when you're sleeping. Now, I'm not trying to apply it to our context today because, I'd say now burglars wait till you go to work or they kind of, but in this context, this is what it's talking about. Jesus would use similar language as well when he's talking to his disciples. Talking about being like a thief in the night, right? There's a reason for that. Because at night you're sleeping. You're off your guard. I thought this was interesting. Now this is not, you may just brush this off and say, whatever. Sardis is mentioned in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament scriptures. In Hebrew, it's known as Sapharad. Sapharad. It's up there if you want to spell it. That was the Hebrew name for Sardis. In Obadiah, verse 20, the long book of Obadiah, sarcasm, verse 20, it says, the company of Israelite exiles who are in Canaan will possess the land of Zarephath, and the exiles from Jerusalem will possess the land of Sepharad. Now, this chapter of Obadiah is dealing with the judgment of Edom. Not of Sardis, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. But I think there's a lot of parallels here, as there often is in Revelation and Old Testament text. John made no mistakes in writing this letter. He knew exactly what he was doing. And he knew exactly what Jesus was telling him to write. This letter, Obadiah, was written to declare judgment on the city of Petra in particular. This was a city that was kind of like I didn't have a picture of it, but it's like that picture on the right is actually of the terrible quality picture, sorry. But that's what's left of that fortress up on top of the Acropolis. That's all that remains, just part of a wall. That earthquake just leveled it. It was gone. But anyway, the city of Petra was real special. Does anybody know the geographical makeup of the city of Petra? How they built the city?
It's carved out of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like in this canyon, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you wanted to capture the city of Petra, good luck. They were in a real good spot to where in order to get to Petra, you almost had to have single file line going through this canyon.
Yeah.
Well, what would happen to your troops as they're going through this canyon, as they're kind of emerging into the open? They're just getting slaughtered, right?
Just picked off, yeah.
That was the point. But something was happening with Israel and Edom. And some believe that what was happening was that when Babylon was basically moving and conquering, the Edomites would not let Israel through this canyon. But you got to dig in history to find that. So what was happening was they were committing violence against their brothers. They were leaving them out in the open. They were leaving them vulnerable. They were saying, no, you got to find another way around. Which would have led to their death or capture. But we see very interesting parallels to Edom and Sardis. Verse 3, pride was a problem that would result in their downfall. That was an issue in both instances, with King Croesus, who thought he was untouchable, and Archelaus, who thought he was untouchable until his cousins came knocking. Verse 5, he mentions the city rest up into the mountains, or the heights. That's how the city of Petra was. It wasn't just in this canyon, but it was built into the canyon. So it was really hard to capture. Sardis was built on the heights of this huge mountain. Verse 5, he mentions, this is Obadiah, this is not Revelation. Obadiah, verse 5, mentions thieves invading their city and disaster striking when? At night. Verse 6 mentions hidden treasures to be pillaged. King Croesus was the richest king living during that time when the Lydian Empire was in control. And to this day, no one has found his hidden treasures. Now, it's rumored that he was buried with his treasures, but they still have yet to find his grave. Verse 7 mentions those eating bread with you will deceive you. Archelaus, family of Antiochus, they were cousins. They probably did break bread together. And yet, his cousin thwarted him by taking the throne and calling himself king. Look at the parallels. I'm not saying that Obadiah was written about Sardis. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying the parallels are there. And John is using this to connect with Edom. So can you imagine? Can you imagine how those reading this letter would have felt? Being compared to Edom?
Yeah.
What?
That's Esau.
Yeah, it's Esau. Exactly. See what he's doing? Just like in Laodicea, he compares their spiritual state to their drinking water. And they knew how gross that was.
Yeah.
Again, he's using the culture and Old Testament scriptures, Jewish scriptures, that they would have known. And if the Gentile converts wouldn't have known them, those who were Jewish background would have. And they would have happily explained it to their brothers and sisters. And they would have said, you don't understand what this is really saying. This is bad. This is not good. And that goes for all the churches. It's not just here, but all the churches. Okay, yeah. Isaiah 45, verses 1 through 3. This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus. Who did I say Cyrus was? The king of Persia, right? Cyrus the Great. Cyrus conquers this known part of the world, and he conquers it pretty quickly. No, he doesn't conquer as fast as Alexander the Great, but he conquers quickly. And it says, whose right hand I take hold to subdue nations before him and strip the kings of their armor, to open doors before him so that the gates will not be shut. I will go before you and will level the mountains. I will break down the gates of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. I will give you hidden treasures, riches stored in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summoned you by name. When we read that, the parallel goes all the way here to Revelation with the culture. Verse 4. We talked about this in the sermon when we talked about Sardis way back. But you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their garments, and they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. I literally just explained this at the beginning of the lesson. I believe that what John is doing is he is touching on something they were very familiar with. That one day out of the year, in the month of March, called the Day of Blood, it fit. The Day of Blood. The people would dress in their white, beautiful garments. They would meet in the town center, and they would march and parade their way to the temple of Kibbalah. And while going there, they would have been getting very drunk. And it was like a procession. It was like a big parade. They would have had statues of Kibbalah and portraits of Kibbalah, and yeah, it was a big deal. And then when they got there, remember that high priestess who would come out and induct the ceremony. Any of those that dedicated and that drunk for sure would have sacrificed a part of their body, the males. Blood would have been everywhere. It would have been disgusting. But but in that sacrifice, if you got their blood on your white garment, if you soiled your garment in their blood because of their sacrifice to the goddess Kibbalah, then you received her blessing. When you really picture this, we really just we think, who would do that? Yeah. I'm telling you, you start digging into this, the dedication to these gods was through the roof. Through the roof. The one who overcomes will be clothed the same way in white garments, and I will not erase his name from the book of life. And I will confess his name before my Father and his angels. And we talked about this a little bit too. The church, the preaching and teaching of Jesus started where? Did it start in a steeple church? Stained glass windows? Yeah. No. Where did it start? Where was a pretty convenient place to start gathering at first?
Synagogues.
Synagogues, yes. Now, eventually, they're going to start meeting in their own homes, or in homes, houses, house churches, they call them. You couldn't build a church building in the first century, second century. Even most of the third century, you couldn't do it. It was only during the third century was that legalized in a way. But until then, you were killed if you were caught building a church building to worship Jesus, the Son of God. I thought that was reference to Caesar. The Son of Man. Okay, now you're really playing on the character of Caesar. But that's who Jesus was. That's who Jesus is to the Christian, to those living in the city of Sardis, in the church. And it wasn't common that when the Roman persecution got super severe, as the preaching and teaching of Jesus became more and more prevalent and more advanced, some, not all, but some of the Jewish synagogues started to bar these people from coming. Because why?
They thought it was false teaching.
Yeah, well, that, and to the Roman, they didn't really mess with you if you were a Jew. Now, there were some emperors that did not like the Jewish people. There were a few out there. But for the most part, Judaism was a pretty freely practiced religion. But this Jesus character? No. No. Too many parallels to Caesar. Not good. That's illegal. And so the synagogues were trying to play it safe and barred people from attending, barred people from the teaching of Jesus. And what do you think that did to the Christians? It made them vulnerable. It made them targets of the Roman Empire. And yes, they started to meet in each other's homes. A lot of times if you had, I think what they said was that, like, in some of these churches, if the members who were a little more wealthy, they were often the ones who would open up their homes, from what I have studied. Now, it was kind of a rare scenario for believers of Jesus to be wealthy. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we'll talk about that with Laodicea in the sermon time later. So that is kind of odd. But it wasn't uncommon for a member to have a good amount of wealth. And they were often the ones who opened their home in that hospitality regard. Actually, if you really study this, many of the people met in the catacombs. Does anybody know what a catacomb is? What's a catacomb?
Where they buried their dead.
Yeah, it's where the dead are. It's like an underground graveyard. Yikes. But that's where they were having to meet in some cases. In the sewers. Places you wouldn't want to be. But that was the safest place they could go. Because the persecution was so great of the followers of Jesus. Philadelphia. I think we can cover a little bit of this this morning, and then we'll wrap up. Philadelphia. There's a lot there. There is a lot of Tanakh references, Old Testament references, cultural references. Endured 3 name changes in its time in the first century. By the end of the first century, it endured 3 name changes. Largest exports was their grapes and wine. They had these beautiful, lush vineyards until Domitian took power. And then he ruined it. Ruined it forever. The city was known as the doorway between 2 regions of the world, Asia and Asia Minor. When you look at the geography of it, don't get confused. I know a lot of people look at it and they go, well, couldn't they go around Philadelphia? No, not unless you want to scale 2 mountain ranges. Go right ahead. Philadelphia sat right in this right in between these two mountain ranges in this little pretty valley right there. It's just a perfect spot. And that's why it was known as the doorway. If you wanted to go into this other part of the world, to Pergamum and Smyrna and all these places, you had to go through Philadelphia. You had to. Like I say, you could go around all day long, but it's going to take you forever to get there. And again, I said residents hated Domitian. There was a reason for that, because all their vineyards, their beautiful, beautiful vineyards, during this great famine that hit Rome in the 90s AD, Domitian has this idea. He says, you know what, I'm going to uproot 75% of these vineyards, and we're going to plant grain fields. And the people even told him, they said, no, this is a bad idea. The soil is not right for that. Well, good luck arguing with that guy. And so Domitian goes through with his plan. They uproot 75% of the vineyards, replace with grain fields, and guess what? The grain fields didn't do very great. And so not only did this not help the famine, but it ruined the economy of Philadelphia. So bad that the people hated Domitian, hated him. They hated him so bad they changed their name from Flavia, and Domitian was part of the Flavian dynasty. That was one of their name changes. They changed it to Flavia. They were so mad at him, hated him so much, they changed their name back to Philadelphia. They didn't want any attachments to that guy. And I put up there Emperor Tiberius. I had that wrong. It was Emperor Nero. Gave the city about without inflation, $600,000 of our currency to rebuild the city after that earthquake in 60 AD. Actually, he funded all 13 cities, I believe, in that region were given money for bailout, and they were given a 5-year tax break. It'd be nice to get a tax break with them for 5 years, but they did. And Laodicea was the only city to reject the bailout money. Yeah, but Philadelphia happily took the money. They needed it bad. And their patron god, as you can imagine, was the god of wine and theater, Dionysus. So it's almost 10 till. So we'll wrap up here. When I'm back with you, we'll finish out Philadelphia and Laodicea, and then we'll be going right into chapter 4 with the throne room of God. So I would encourage you, until we meet again, I would encourage you to read the letter to Philadelphia. There's a lot of references there. There's a lot of Old Testament Tanakh references, and also a lot of cultural references. Jesus says he opens doors that no one can shut. Philadelphia was the doorway, right? Yeah. Key of David, there's a play on the Tanakh with that. So we will, when we get to it, we'll have fun getting into that text and studying and reading it. Does anybody have any questions or comments about anything? Melinda, thank you very much for your comment. Does anybody else have anything they want to add or throw out here? All right. Like I said, just read that text, chapter 3, start at verse 7, and read the rest of that chapter, and the next time we're together, we'll finish it out. Thank you for your attention.